About 50 years ago, an astronaut returning from the moon experienced things that he couldn't find a scientific explanation for. So, with some colleagues, he launched a new science focused on the mind and how it works in the body and across space and time. It's the field of Noetics, where the tools of modern science are used to help us understand how what we think and feel affects us and the world around us. Now, this is Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments from the studios of KXCR Community Radio in Florence, Oregon.
Well, hi there. Welcome to Noetic Moments, where we explore the field of research that discovers what consciousness is, what it does, how it works, and how our lives could be very different if we understood it better. I'm Ruth Miller, your host, and through this series of programs, I'm sharing some of the history and explaining some of the ideas and experiments and introducing some of the people whose work has defined this field of research. I'll also explore some relevant news items and answer questions that you send to my email address, ruth@noeticmoments.org. Now, if you caught any of our earlier shows, you may remember that we generally have two ways of thinking about consciousness. In the world of medicine and psychology, consciousness means you're awake, you're aware, you know what's going on around you, you're conscious. In the field of noetics, as it's been emerging over the last 100 years, consciousness is understood as much more than that. It's the processes and products of mind, both in our awareness and outside of it. It's the profound human experiences that we have. And ultimately, consciousness is what connects us all. So far in this series, we talked about Sigmund Freud, who opened the door to understanding the processes of mind and its structure in the early 1900s. And we went on to Carl Jung's ideas on how our individual consciousness must be understood as part of what he called the collective unconscious. I introduced Charles Tart's idea of states of consciousness, each with a physiological and emotional and mental set of characteristics. And then we met Julian Jaynes, who related consciousness to the separation of right and left hemispheres of the brain. I introduced some of the field models of the mind that have been developed by Sheldrake, Levine, and others. And then we began to consider how quantum mechanics relates to the study of mind, thought, and consciousness as a whole, with the work of David Bohm and Dana Zohar. If you're curious about any of these topics, you can catch up on them on the KXCR.net archives tab or on noeticmoments.org. There you'll find links to all of the clips that I include in the show, as well as to books and authors as I'm mentioning them. Now, today we're considering a pretty amazing idea, that there is a single unifying brain or mind affecting all of humanity. Now, this is not a new idea. Herbert Spencer in the late 1800s described society as one living organism made up of the people in it as individual cells and following the same developmental stages. Ralph Waldo Emerson in the 1850s said that there is one mind common to all humanity, and each is an inlet and outlet to the same. H.G. Wells wrote a book that he called World Brain in the mid-1930s, in which he was describing, quote, a process of mental accumulation throughout the world, which I believe to be inevitable. And he was pointing out that there is so much information available through enormously increased speed of telecommunications and so much new energy that there was a new order emerging. And he called for a world library and ultimately a world brain. In the 1960s, Arthur Clarke, some of you know him as the author of the book 2001 and its sequels, wrote a book in 1962 called Profiles of the Future, and he predicted the construction of a world brain that he thought would happen in the same stage as Wells did, a world library accessible to everyone from their home computer terminals. He figured that would be in place by 2000, and if you use Wikipedia as much as I do, we pretty much have that, or Google Books or Good Books or any of the others that you can get online. And then the world brain, he said, a super intelligent, artificially intelligent supercomputer that humans would be able to mutually interact with. And he figured that would be done by the year 2100 as a tool for people to use in the way that the Soviets in the 60s and the U.S. used war rooms. Now, global consciousness could be considered a very different idea. We're not talking about creating a computer that serves everyone in the whole planet. That concept was really the concern of Teilhard de Chardin in the 30s through 50s, actually, and more recently, Peter Russell. There are two different forms of this. One is what's now called transhumanist, and that's the idea that our global networks, the various systems that adapt, artificial intelligence, the various ways humans and machine converge, cognitive science and other technical and mechanical artifacts together would somehow, through a quantum jump in complexity and cognitive systems, function at a higher level of evolution. They call it a cybernetic phase shift, a meta-system transition. And this is fun for me because that was a fair amount of my graduate work was in cybernetics and systems. And right now, machines are barely learning how to learn. But you never know. The organic model, though, the notion of a global mind, what Chardin called a noosphere, is related to the concepts that Carl Jung was suggesting and that Emerson was suggesting, and that there is some mind, some collective unconscious mind that includes evolutionary biology, it includes our awareness of the environment, it includes our spiritual practices, and as it's talked about, some people even weave in the Gaia hypothesis as developed by James Lovelock in the 1980s to explain how planets create life through their interaction of the various subsystems. Well, let's look at these models. I'm going to start with Peter Russell. He was a physicist who studied with Stephen Hawking at Cambridge and was just fascinated and intrigued and everything else, but he kept getting pulled away from the mathematics and the physics into what ultimately became psychology. So he got a graduate degree in psychology, and he's the one who made the term global brain popular in his book by that title in 1983. It's since been re-released in several versions, the most recent being The Global Brain, Speculations on the Evolutionary Leap to Planetary Consciousness. He's operating from a model that says pretty much what Herbert Spencer was saying, that the number of nodes in our various internet and media networks is comparable to the number of cells in a human brain. In a presentation in Japan in 1990, he laid out his thought process. He says, we're not like other creatures because we don't have to learn everything new with each generation. We learn from each other. With the advent of language, we began learning together as a single species. Then he says, limited to speech alone, ideas couldn't travel far without becoming lost. So we developed new technologies that increased our ability to share ideas and process information. We moved from speech to writing, to the printing press, to telegraph, to telephone, radio, television, tape recording, video, photocopying, and electronic data processing and sharing. This enhanced processing capability had an immediate positive feedback. It reinforced the development of material technology and allowed us to design and build bigger and more complex systems faster and faster, leading the way to, ultimately, a workerless factory and opening the door into space, all at an increasingly rapid pace. Now, this pace is something he really emphasizes in the book, The Global Brain. He talks about how each new development in technology increases the speed by which further developments unfold and affect us. You know how it is in your own learning process. The initial stages are kind of slow and clumsy, and then as you get whatever it is that you're beginning to learn, it happens more and more easily and effortlessly and quickly, and then allows new learning on top of that. The same is true for technology in a culture. Russell says, by the mid-1970s, the number of people engaged in the processing of information had caught up with those engaged in industry, the processing of matter and energy. From that time on, information processing has been our dominant activity. We have entered the information age. And then he says, perhaps the greatest impact of the information technology has been that of telecommunications. Satellites, fiber optics, digital coding, computer switching, faxes, video links, other advances in telecommunications are weaving an ever-thickening web of information around the world. And we, the billions of minds in this huge global brain, are being linked together by the fibers of our telecommunication systems in much the same way as the billions of cells in our own brain are linked. Russell reminds us, though, that this global linkage is not necessarily going to ensure the future welfare of humanity. He points out, quote, just as a human could be either a wise, sensitive, caring person or could be a rather egocentric or even mad person, the same is true of humanity as a whole. We can link together to form a global brain, but if we're not careful, the result could be a rather insane global brain. We're already seeing examples of that. Obviously, environmental issues, continued warfare, expanding homelessness are all indicators of humanity's insanity. And another indicator is the content of the internet. Many of us are being very disappointed by as one of my techie friends puts it, the sewer that the internet has become. And chatbots have definitely shown us that. Chatbots that are designed to use the language that they learn from the internet tend to be rather foul-mouthed and pretty bigoted beings. And Russell is concerned. He says the alleviation of suffering and the search for a more satisfying state of mind, call it happiness, fulfillment, inner peace, joy, pleasure, or what you will, has been the motivation behind all our revolutions and breakthroughs. For the global brain to be able to do that, he says, what we need most today is a concerted international effort to discover the best ways of fostering a widespread shift in consciousness. And, he points out, since the sciences don't have the answers on how to do that, he encourages people to explore and adopt spiritual teachings, especially those of the East. In his own words, Russell goes on to say,
as well as this linking at a physical level, we are also beginning to link together at a deeper level. As a result of the information explosion, telecommunications, and the birth of computer networks, we are beginning to exchange information with each other wherever we may be. We are beginning to share our thinking. We are beginning to connect up mentally. We are beginning to link mind to mind. And as we begin to understand each other, an even deeper level of linking is occurring, a linking of soul to soul. We are beginning to appreciate our essential unity and oneness. So the next stage of evolution could be humanity beginning to link together, physically and mentally, beginning to work and function on many different levels as an integrated system.
That was Peter Russell speaking very soon after the book was released in a YouTube that the link is on our website. So Russell was seeing this incredible opportunity in this linkage But what he was doing was seeing a stage in human development. It was a very short-term way of thinking. The paleontologist and priest Teilhard de Chardin also saw electronics contributing to a new kind of mind, but he saw that as part of a many millions-year-old evolutionary process. As he described in a speech called The Formation of the Noosphere in January 1947, he envisioned a radical transformation of planet Earth through communications networks and computers as part of this ongoing evolutionary dynamic. According to Chardin, 3 conditions had to be met for this transformation to come about. First, humans had to be here. Previous life forms did not have what he called the unique faculty of reflection that enables sophisticated symbolic communication. It enables the unification of human groups. Second, he said, with humans, evolution became no longer only diverging into more and more diverse species, but also converging as humans form bigger and more integrated wholes, communities, nations, multinational organizations. Third, Chardin said, humans had to become a global species to dwell in all places around the world and weave new links to exchange goods and information on a global scale. So with the coming of humanity, not only was there this new language by which we could share, but there was also a new kind of heredity. He said it was through example and education that understanding, wisdom, knowledge was shared. And he said that was foreshadowed long before among highest forms of insects and vertebrates. But in humanity now, heredity is primarily noospheric, transmitted by the surrounding environment even more than by genes. Teilhard de Chardin tells us that what is true for each individual at any moment is precisely what is happening in that surrounding environment, happening across all of humanity. Every person on Earth, he says, shares in their own individual experience the heightening of consciousness promoted by the existence in our minds of the new concepts of matter and new dimensions of cosmic reality that are emerging as a result of our application of the new technologies. He points out that we're experiencing an evolutionary process, and there will be an essential difference, a difference of order between the unitary state toward which we're moving and everything we have hitherto known. He points out that the greatest empires in history have never covered more than fragments of the earth, but we can see today that Western corporate culture, with its fashions and cell phones and music and technology of all kinds and the internet, covers the planet. Until now, we have only seen mind manifest itself on this planet in separated groups and in a static state. But with these global communications networks, instant communication across continents is ongoing. We are functioning as a global intelligence. So, he says, the new state of conscious being will be 2 things. It will be a state of active sympathy in which each separate human element, breaking out of its insulated state under the impulses of the information and the tensions generated in the noosphere, will emerge into a field of what he calls prodigious affinities, which is to say we will be able to connect with and honor and appreciate all the experiences of all the people everywhere. So, Teilhard de Chardin tells us 2 things now seem certain. The first is that following the state of collective organization we have already achieved, the process of planetization can only advance ever further in the direction of growing unanimity. The second is that this growth of unanimity, being of its nature convergent, coming to a point, cannot continue indefinitely without reaching the natural limit of its course. And when that final convergence is complete, the shared consciousness of humanity, he says, will, quote, break through the material framework of time and space to escape somewhere toward an ultra-center of unification and consistency, which only spiritual traditions have thus far defined. So the global brain, these two theorists are telling us, is both an artifact of our current technological capability and a driver of humanity's evolution, away from separate, isolated individuals and communities, and toward a single planetary awareness in which each member is unique in the same way that each cell in the human body is unique and has its own identity, but is shaped and is guided and is encouraged and is fed and informed by the shared mind of all. An ongoing evolutionary process, they tell us. Now, the idea that they're talking about has continued to be developed. We can see in many Eastern European people studying in cybernetics various pieces that have come up. The Belgian cyberneticist Heiligen has argued that the global brain is an emerging metasystem with respect to the level of individual human intelligence, and he's looking for the specific evolutionary mechanisms that promote the transition. In 2012, the Global Brain Institute was founded at a university in Brussels to develop a mathematical theory of the brain-like propagation of information across the internet. That same year, Thomas Malone and collaborators from MIT started to explore how the global brain could be programmed to be more effective using the mechanisms of collective intelligence. And some of what they're talking about is described in a book, The Wisdom of Crowds, Why the Many Are Smarter Than the Few, written by James Surowiecki. I hope I got that correct. And what he's saying is that the average of a group is often far wiser than the individual choices. He uses a number of anecdotes to explain that. All these links will be on the website, noeticmoments.org. So it's a continuing area of interest and research, and we're looking forward to seeing where that goes. All right, now, one of the people that's looking to see where that's going is Ervin Laszlo. I've had the honor to work with him on a couple of projects over the years. We were both in the Society for General Systems Research, now the Institute for the Study of System Sciences, while I was in academia. This book, The Quantum Shift in the Global Brain, How the New Scientific Reality Can Change Us and Our World, came out 2008. Laszlo was part of the Club of Rome back in the 70s and has since been organizing various other wonderful groups to help us make this transition that he's seeing. He has helped create Global Peace Meditation Days, an international survey of emergent cultures, a World Wisdom Council, and a Global Shift University, as well as the Club of Budapest, which is where he's been working from in his native country for the last several years. Part 1 in the book, Quantum Shift in the Global Brain, is called Macro Shift in Society, and Chapter 1 is Evolution or Extinction? That is the question. And he's saying basically we've reached that point, the turning point, where we either will fall apart or we will make a major transition. He calls it a macro shift. It is the societal equivalent to a quantum leap. That is to say, you're moving along, you don't see any change, and suddenly there is a change. And we are in it, he is saying. He says we've gone from a kinship system through a village system, through an empire system, to a nation-state system, and we are entering into the shift to a planetary system. He's saying, however, that because of all the things that we have been thinking and doing, our mythos, our vision, our beliefs, we have been acting in a way that is not sustainable. And he talks about what a planetary ethic might be, fundamental to that ethic being the reverence for natural systems and an understanding of how they work and how we can work with them, and developing behavioral codes that go along with that. The book is a marvelous guidebook for getting through this time. He provides all kinds of interesting insights and tools and maps. And one of them is the culture of holos, which he is calling the rise of a new culture. And here are some of the behaviors that he is seeing. The shift from competition to reconciliation and partnership. The shift from greed and scarcity to sufficiency and caring. The shift from outer to inner authority. From reliance on outer sources of authority to inner sources of knowing. The shift from mechanistic to living systems ideas. Perhaps most significant of all, he says, is the shift from separation to wholeness, a fresh recognition of the wholeness and interconnectedness of all aspects of life and reality. So this notion that we are a planetary society with one culture and ultimately one mind, going through a shift from operating as if we were separate and isolated to operating as a whole is the essence of Laszlo's book, Quantum Shift in the Global Brain. And isn't that relevant to today's news? So we will be combining in that book the review and the news item. And that brings us pretty much to the end. Over the weeks to come, we'll look at more models and we'll look at others of the many books that have been written on aspects of this science and try to keep up with new titles as they come out. If you know of a book or a video you'd like me to address, or if there is a news issue you want me to address, or you're seeing something in the world you're trying to understand, email me, ruth@noeticmoments.org, and I'll take a look at it. Well, that has to be it for today's show. The next time we get together, we'll explore another explanation of consciousness. We're out of time today, but remember, you can continue the exploration on our website, noeticmoments.org. We do have links to all of the titles and other resources we refer to and the clips for past shows and current shows. And you can send me your comments and questions, which I will do my best to answer. For now, thanks for joining me here on Noetic Moments at KXCR Community Radio, 90.7 FM, and have a wonderful week.
You've been listening to Dr. Ruth Miller's Noetic Moments. This program is produced in the studios of KXCR Community Radio in beautiful Florence, Oregon, supported by you, our listeners. Our theme music is Tumbling Planets, composed and performed by Jeff Lovejoy. To hear this program again or learn more about Noetic Sciences, search our website, www.noeticmoments.org.